Hi there my friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm working pastel on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. I sketched out the image of this fox on a separate sheet of paper, then transferred it to the pastel matte paper using the trace down method. So I've started by applying all of the background with PanPastels, and I'm now applying the base coats of the fox's fur to the paper. And if those, there you go, that's what PanPastels look like. They're like little round compacts like you get makeup in, and there's compacted pigment in each pan, and you just apply it either with your fingers or with one of these soft tools. So these tools are like made of plastic, a little bit like palette knives, coming 4 different shapes and sizes, with little sponges like little socks that you pop on, and you can turn the sponges round when you've used one side of them and use the other side. You can wash these and dry them, but they do tend to wear out quite quickly, so I probably get through 1 or 2 during a painting of this size, and it really is like painting with paint. I like to get all of the base coat layers on first, get some movement in the fur, obviously keeping an eye on my reference images so that I know that the fur's travelling in the correct direction and roughly the right length as well, because obviously throughout a painting the fur density, direction and the hair length will change, as will the colours and the tones. But what I try to do is I try to squint at my reference images and just look for the basic colours and the basic values within each given part of the reference image. I do have my image up to the left hand side of the easel on my iPad, and what I do is I like to put a grid, a very light colour grid, over my reference images, but I don't put that on anywhere on my drawing, not even when I'm sketching out. It's just that by having a grid over my reference image, it helps me to focus on a certain part of the reference as opposed to the whole thing. And I very rarely, if ever, print out a reference image. So once the base coat's all applied, I can move on to the next part. So I don't do any detailing at this stage. I just want to get some colour down onto the paper. And Clairefontaine Pastel Matte, if you haven't heard of that, the paper that I'm working on today, it is my preferred paper now for pastel and has been for many years. I used to work on velour and all different pastel papers, but I always come back to this paper. And the reason being, it's got a texture like cork. It sort of feels like cork if you run your hand across it. And it doesn't feel like it has an awful lot of tooth. Well, in actual fact it does. It'll hold multiple layers of pastel. I've never ran out of tooth with it, and there's no drop off, so none of the pastel falls away once the piece is finished, and I don't have to use any fixatives either. You can use fixatives on it if you want, but I've never felt the need for it. So going on again, I've changed the sponge. In actual fact, it's a different shape tool as well. Popped in a clean sponge on there, and now just picking up some of the darks and applying them. And you can either mix the colours in the little palettes themselves as you would with paint, or you can get a piece of sort of printer paper to one side, mix the colours on there, and then lift with a sponge and apply those to your paper. You can work light to dark, dark to light, and I tend to work both ways. So just getting the base coats on now. I hope everyone's keeping well. I know it's been a while since I posted my last video, but I've been getting ready for an exhibition that's coming up towards the end of the month. That's the EWA, Exhibition of Wildlife Art. I'll pop the details of the exhibition in the description. So if you want to take a look, they have an online gallery that runs all the way through the year after the exhibition as well. Well, during and after the exhibition. I'm also exhibiting at the moment somewhere else as well, at the Catalyst Museum in Widnes in Cheshire as well. So busy, busy, busy. But I wanted to get this piece finished. It's now finished and framed, and yeah, it's just been a bit of a busy time. So applying more, and no white at the minute. It looks like white's going on there at the minute, but it's actually white mixed with a lilac colour. And obviously, as always, I've popped the finished painting to the top left hand corner of the screen, so you can see what I'm aiming for. So I use several different reference images for this painting. So I do like to sketch and get my initial outlines from a variety of reference images, just so it's something pleasing to the eye. So just a nice composition. And this piece it's quite a large piece actually. It's just under a full sheet of Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. So just resting my hand there on the bottom of the easel, just steadying myself a little bit. You can use, I do later on in the video, use a piece of glassine paper that's also made by Clairefontaine to rest my hand on, and just to steady my hand. And you can put the glassine paper over any medium and nothing sticks to it. So and I also have a mole stick, and I sometimes use that as well to rest my hand on. If you find now I did find this during this painting, that makes sense. My hand went shaky for some reason, I don't know why, later on in the painting, and I found that if I pushed my hand against the surface that I was resting it on, the shaking stopped. So tip there, I'd either had too much coffee or not enough. So building up some more colour, and this is nothing like the reference image, the colour that I used in especially the lighter parts of the fox. I just wanted to bring some of the background colours into the fox fur itself. As with all colours, the whites and the greys in the fox's fur reflect its surroundings. So I do like to bring in some of the background colours, and it just gels the two together, gels the subject and the background together. It gives a more harmonious feeling in the finished painting. So the background was completely made up. So I just popped a load of colours on there and had a play and hoped that it would all work out, and it did. I was really pleased with it. And I do like to get the background in first. So I know some artists leave the background till last. That's not something that I generally do. I like to get the background in, then put the subject on the top, so there's no halo effect around the subject. Nothing worse than getting a subject in and then having to put the background in, because then you'd be wary of moving right up to the edge of the fur with the background. I do like the overlap that occurs when you put the subject in after the background. If I ramble today, please forgive me. It's early in the morning and I've only had one coffee so far. So just popping a little bit of a creamy apricot colour in there, some blues. And because there's blues going in, I didn't put any yellows in, because then you'd end up with green, because these colours will mix. And going on with some pencils, just to darken. That was a Caran d'Ache pencil. That's a Caran d'Ache pencil as well. So the Caran d'Ache pastel pencils are very soft and very creamy. So I like to use those in certain areas, but I will go between brands depending on the colours that I want and the softness, the amount of softness I want. So not really putting detail in as such, just putting texture in at the moment. That's also a Caran d'Ache. And having a wider range of pencils, if you are going to use pencils, does help, because the pencils are harder to mix. Soft pastels, easy to mix a colour that you haven't got. Pastel pencils, a little bit harder. It can be done, but it's just a little bit more time consuming. So there with my finger, just blending out some of the harsher lines that I'd created, because I want it all to look quite soft under there. I want the focus to be on the fox's face, especially the eyes. And later on in the video you'll see that I've filmed the eyes from start to finish, so there's nothing left out there for you to see. Now I have a canvas on my easel and I'll be sketching onto that this afternoon, so looking forward to that. So just building up some movement in the fur, making sure there's no straight lines, because there's no straight lines in nature, especially when it comes to fur and feathers and things like that. So just patting it down, applying a little bit of pigment and then just patting it down so it's not too, what's the word, defined. So just putting some directional strokes in there, just so I don't lose my way and it ends up looking flat. And it looks like a quick process because this is really sped up, but it's a slow process. I'm guessing that acrylics are probably my fastest medium, coloured pencil being the slowest, and then everything else sits in between. If you're new to a medium and you want to try a new medium, then I do suggest working a little smaller just until you get the feel for a new medium, because it can be quite tricky to work on something really big if you haven't used a medium before. And also if you're going to try a new medium, then it's in my artistic journey, it's always been better to try a new medium with a familiar subject, and vice versa. If you're going to try a different subject, then use a familiar medium until you get used to the subject you're working on. So still working with the Caran d'Ache pastel pencils at the moment, just to get a softer effect. So the softer the pigment, the softer the effect that you'll get. And patting it down, blending it out just a little bit. Further on in the video you will see that I start using a paper stump when I want more precise blending of areas, but that'll do for now. All of the colours, all pastel colours, they might look quite opaque, but they do have some transparency to them, so layering is always the way I go. It just allows the colours underneath to show through a little bit. And you can glaze with pastels just as the same as glazing with a paint medium too. And when I sharpen my pastel pencils, I do use a knife, and then just to remove the wooden outer covering, and then I use a piece of fine sandpaper just to get the pastel to a point. The pigment that is sanded off can be mixed with a little bit of water and it can be used as paint. So there's no use. I'm waffling today, sorry. There's no need for any wastage. Okay, so I'll come back to the throat area of the fox later, and now it's time to start applying base coats to the ears. So using a piece of glassine paper there to rest my hand on, and it won't pick up any of the pigment that's already been applied beneath it. keeping my eye on the reference image, so the direction of the strokes I'm putting on is in keeping with the fox fur. And not putting any of the lightest areas in. So when I'm looking at the reference image, I'm trying to look beyond the detail. So I'm trying to look at the tones and the values that are beneath the detail of the fox. I know some artists squint, which I do sometimes. I squint at my reference image so everything blurs. And because I'm working with a reference image on my iPad, I can always digitally blur the reference image, and that helps too. And also the beauty of working from a reference image on a digital appliance such as a phone or an iPad is that I can zoom in on screen if I need to. When I come up to the edge of the ear or any part of the fox where it's touching the background, I just have to be very careful that I don't get any of the pastel onto the background, and that I don't drag any of the background into the area that I'm working in. So again, going on with the base coats there, but not too light, because that can be saved for working with pastel pencils in a bit. So when working with pastels, you don't need soft pastels and pastel pencils. One or the other will work. If I was to do all of this in pastel pencil, which I could, the whole thing in pastel pencil, I could do that, but it would take a lot longer. And vice versa, I could do the whole fox in soft pastel. It would just be a softer looking finished painting, because obviously detailing is a little bit harder to get when you're using just soft pastels. With the PanPastels, you don't actually need that many colours because they're so mixable. You can, as I said, mix them on a piece of paper, and it is like mixing paint. As long as you've got a basic knowledge of colour theory and colour mixing, you can make a limited palette work really well for a painting. So turn the painting on its side now, and using a harder pastel pencil. So a harder brand. And there comes the little wooden paper stump. Sorry, I don't think I'd be able to do it with a wooden stump. That'd be like a toothpick or something, with a paper stump. And just to blend things out. I'll put the different makes of pastel pencils in the description. So that's Carbothello pastel pencil. I know that one because the whole barrel is the colour of the lead, of the pigment. And I believe that's a Faber-Castell. So building up the texture now, which is it's fun. It's such an enjoyable medium to work with. No dust in the air, and no pastel fall off onto the easel or anything like that. And that is just down to the paper, the Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. It can be used with any dry medium, graphite, charcoal, pastel, coloured pencil, and because of its texture and how it's made, it can also be used with water-soluble mediums too. So sometimes if I'm working on a piece such as a leopard or a cheetah, something that's got vivid markings, dark spots, I do sometimes go on first pop my initial sketch on and then block everything in and the markings in with gouache and then go on top. Gouache dries with just about the same texture as this paper, so it dries matte and it gives a little bit of tooth too, so it's very similar in texture to the paper when dry, and that can speed things up as well. So there's nothing worse than going over black pastel with a colour on top and then the colour being slightly altered by the mixing with the pastel that's underneath. Now you eliminate that if you pop gouache on first instead of a black or dark brown pastel pigment. So again, keeping my eye on the reference image, making sure I'm not doing, oh, there's 10 hairs just there and 4 hairs just there. I'm not doing it like that. I'm just making sure that the hairs I am putting on are travelling in the correct direction and that they are roughly the correct length for that part of the anatomy of the fox. I have my glass scene attached to the top of the board, just with a bulldog clip, so I can move it around when I need to. And again, working light to dark and dark to light. And blending out again with a paper stump. And the idea when I was first thinking about doing this fox portrait was that I'd have the head definitely in focus, and then as I moved across the fox to the left of the painting it would go more and more out of focus. So the bottom left hand side of the painting doesn't have any detail in it at all. And then as you move to the right and up towards the face, the amount of detail increases. And people often ask me, what colours do I use? And to be honest, I haven't got the foggiest. So I just look at what colours are in the reference image. I pick up a brown, try it. If it's the wrong one, that's fine, I'll pick up another one. Colour isn't that important. Contrast and the way you work your own colours together are more important. Because if this fox is under a different lighting or in a different environment, its colouring would be different anyway. So I don't worry about things like that. As long as it looks realistic, that's what matters to me. And obviously once I start using a certain brown or a certain cream or a certain tan colour, I put those to one side so I can keep going back to them. Okay, so I've put all of the base coats around that eye, and now I can go in with the eye and get that settled in. So because it's a smaller area, I'm not using the PanPastels anymore, and the whole of the eye is going to be worked with pastel pencils. So starting just mapping out where the shadows are underneath the eyelid. And the eyes are nothing like the reference image either. I've altered them quite a lot, the colour. I'm sorry if you can hear my phone going off in the background. I'm just going to mute it. I'm back. Oh, the joys. So just popping in where I want the highlight to go, and I can alter that colour, popping in a little bit of a blue, and yeah, the highlight, there's not a lot in these eyes that is anything like the reference image, except they're how big they are, and obviously where they're situated on the fox's face. I can't go away from that with the reference image. But the rest is I want it to feel like the light's coming down from the top, and just putting life into the eyes, really. And I think that comes with practice. You can have the best reference image in the world, but will it look okay as a painting? And some are yes and some are no. So knowing a little bit about anatomy, if you want to practice eyes, I always say to people that big cat's eyes are one of the best ones to practice on. There's a lot of life in big cat eyes, and if you zoom in, you go into lots of detail and play with different colours, and just have fun, really. And remember that you're working on something that is round. It's not flat, you know, it's a complete sphere, and you want to make sure you get the darks in at the sides so it looks like the eye is actually going round and back into the animal's skull. So you do need shadows, you do need highlights, because no eye is flat. So you're leaving some highlights there so it'll look wet when it's finished. Making sure I'm going in with different browns and reds and a little bit of green as well. And just varying it. Just varying the colours. A little bit of, looks like a little bit of yellow ochre going in there. And a burgundy going in. And just taking it nice and slow and steady. And the beauty is, if I do put a colour in that I don't like, I can either go over it, or I can get a little bit of scotch tape or masking tape and gently lift the pastel back off the paper, as long as I haven't pressed it too far into the tooth of the paper. Popping in the pupil with a dark brown, so no black. If I want to use black I can, but it'd be right at when I'm finishing the eye. I don't want any black in there yet. So the darkest browns, the darkest burgundies, you could even use a dark blue or a dark purple to really push those darks. And blend in delicately with the paper stump. And as you apply the pastel to the paper, you can actually blend the colours as you work in them, so you can mix the colours as you're working on the paper too, blending the edges together of different colours. So variety, getting a lot of variety in there with the colours that I've already used in the painting so far. And I just pat it down, so I'm not rubbing it in or anything like that. I'm just patting down the colour, and that just blends it very slightly with whatever's underneath it. Anything too light I can go over with a darker colour, and anything too dark I can lighten up too. And that's sort of a bluish grey just going on there, just adding a little bit of a change to the highlight. And in with a tiny bit of black there, and a tiny bit of black underneath the eyelid. And one thing to stay clear of, if you want your eyes to look realistic, is to either use a reference image that hasn't been taken with a flash. So I do quite a few commissions, And obviously people send me photographs of their pets or wildlife photographs, and if they've used a flash, you'll end up with just like that pinprick of light in the eye, so a circular dot of light in the eye. Now even if that is in the reference image, I change it to a more natural looking highlight, because when I see a painting and it does have just that dot of light, all that says to me is, oh, whoever took the reference photo had a flash on at the time, and it does look very artificial. So by altering that and putting a more natural looking highlight in, just helps with the realism of your finished painting. So just taking a break from the eye at the minute. And sometimes when I am filming, I do flit around from one part of the painting to another, and it's just while I give my head a bit of a break from whichever part I've been working on, and then when I come back to it, it's looking at it with fresh eyes but without having to stop working. If I reach a point in a painting where I do really need to have a break, I'll just go and make a drink or sketch on something else, work on something else, and then come back to it with fresh eyes. Once I'd finished this fox, I left him on the easel for a couple of days, and then I did come back and alter a few little bits that were standing out to me when I was looking at it with fresh eyes, and then obviously I have to make the decision that it's finished, and that can be hard sometimes. I know a lot of people say, when do you know that a painting is finished? And I just think of Leonardo da Vinci, and he said a painting's never finished, it's merely abandoned. So because you could go on forever, but at some point you've got to call it quits and move on to your next project. If you think there's something wrong with your painting or drawing and you're not quite sure, there's a few techniques you can do. You can turn your painting, your project upside down and have a look at it. But what I tend to do is I take photographs of my work on my phone while I'm working, and I'll have a quick look, and 9 times out of 10, if there's something not quite sitting right, it does show up when you're looking at it in a small digital scale. You can also edit the photo on your phone, increase the contrast or alter the colour tint, and if it's looking better on your digital image than your actual painting, then you can just go back and alter your painting to match the changes you've made on your phone. So that's another tip. So not leaving any white on the membrane around the bottom of the eye. Added a little bit of pink there. You can add a little bit of white as well. A little bit of yellow going in, but when I'm putting yellow on and I've already applied a little bit of black around, especially underneath the eyelid, I've got to be careful the two don't meet, because they will create a strange, not very nice to look at green. So yeah, the eye's probably what took the longest on this painting, and that's nice. I don't mind that. That's what I enjoy. So pop the other eye in, and now onto the nose. So again, the nose in the photo, in the reference photo, was very bland, nothing really exciting about it. Muted greys and black, and that's not what I wanted in this painting. So again, using colours from the rest of the painting and from the background, start making it up as I go along, really. So some lilacs from the background, and then just working in little circular motions, just to create texture on the nose. Oh, for those of you that have been asking for longer videos, this one's running at around 52 minutes. So it's really hard to know what to do, shorter videos or longer videos, but a lot of people have been asking for the longer ones, so I am mixing them up a little bit more. Especially when it comes to things like eyes and noses. It's just nice to see the work that actually goes into them. If you'd like me to cover any subjects or mediums, just pop a comment below and I'll add them to my to-do list. And if you've been a regular on my YouTube channel, you know that I do work in quite a few different mediums: acrylics, pastels, graphite, ink, coloured pencils, all different things. Gouache and watercolour as well. Just making sure that the shadows and darker areas are in the correct position, else the nose can quite quickly go out of shape. And very gentle blending. The colour of the paper definitely helps. The Clairefontaine pastel matte paper comes in a variety of colours, but I tend to stick either with this one, which is the light grey, or there is one called, I think it's called a Crew, or it might be called Sand actually, which is a subtle brown, a light brown. But apart from that, I don't really use any of the other colours. And I do buy the big sheets and cut them down as I need them. So onto some fur. Again, I'm just popping in some guidelines, really dark guidelines, so I can judge which direction the hairs are growing and the length, and taking it slightly out of focus the further away from the eye I go towards the edge of the fox. So when you want to create a sense of out of focus, you can use the side of the pencil, which I'm doing there, and you can also let your pencil go quite blunt too, and that stops you from popping too much detail in. So just breaking up that line there. And in with some dark again, just blocking everything in really. And this is how I work the rest of the face as well. Just all the base coats have been put in with the soft pastels, the PanPastels, and then it's a case of going into each segment of the face, each part of the face, and starting like this, just using the pastel pencils to start blocking in the areas that are darker, and then adding the details and the highlights as I go. Keeping it soft and still out of focus. Excuse me. And then when I go on with that yellow ochre, then I was just gently glazing the cream colour that I'd put down earlier. That's a pink going on there, very light pink. Back in with a burgundy, so backwards and forwards until it's looking how I want it to look. And that's a dark brown. And turning my pencil, if I want to keep a point for a longer time, I'll put a couple of strokes on and turn the pencil in my hand, and the paper will just pick up the pigment a lot easier, and it keeps your point on your pencil for a lot longer. So just doing a little bit of overlap now onto where the grey paper is still showing. So I don't want a straight edge where the brown fur ends and the white fur starts. So overlapping randomly onto that blank area and just darkening some areas and highlights. Putting the highlights in as well. And again, keeping my eye on the reference image now, because the fur does undulate because of the anatomy of the fox, the muscular structure of the fox and the skull underneath all that lovely fur. And the more you can understand the subject and its structure, the more realism you can achieve in a painting. So a good reference image helps, but it's not the be all and end all. And as I said earlier, just because something looks great in a photograph doesn't automatically transfer to looking great in a painting. So you might need a little bit to use a little bit of artistic license sometimes with sculpting the shapes when working with wildlife photos. Okay, so all the base coats onto the white area that's looking very lilac, but that's what I wanted for the base coat, so I could then work on top of them. And it's all about making the white fur look as reflective as possible with its surroundings. So this isn't like the reference image at all. So still working on the base coat there, and just getting the base coat a little darker where it needs to go. And just very, very small marks going on there, just to break the colour up a little bit before adding the light blues and light lilacs and whites. So when I add white, it's never going to look white as if I'd have put it straight on the grey paper, the white will look as white as it can. But because I'm going over other colours, the colour that's underneath is always going to tint the white slightly. So if I do want to go really white in an area, which I don't on this particular painting, but if I did, then I'd pop the white in first and have no different base coat underneath. But then it can look very flat. So it's a balancing act. If you want something to look really white or very light, then the thing next to it has to be dark. So if you're looking at your painting and a part of it doesn't look light enough, 9 times out of 10 it's because what's next to it isn't dark enough, and vice versa. So it does help sometimes just to play with contrast like that. So just getting little directional strokes in there that will help me later when I start applying the lighter colours. And again, I'm not counting how many hairs are just here or there. I'm just looking for the correct texture. So direction and hair length. That's always a must in any painting that I do. And a fly came to visit. That's a fly flying about. I do blow it blow it away. It comes back a couple of times. So using a white now, and that's a Carbothello white. It's not the strongest of whites because I didn't want anything too harsh. And I will be patting it down and letting it mix with the lilac underneath. And I do glaze blue over the top of it later as well. Patting it down, there you go, and it just softens it. It doesn't look as harsh. And that's a sort of a bluish grey going on there. And when you're applying base coats to a painting, it can be very easy to actually lose the initial sketch under the layers. So from time to time I do just pop in those guidelines again from the initial sketch, just so I make sure I'm keeping everything in proportion, and details such as the line of the mouth are kept in the correct position. But I don't want the initial sketch so dark that it's going to show through the subsequent layers of pastel either. So just blending that very gently. Oh, my hair, sorry about that. I was blending that very carefully, just creating a very subtle shadow there. And I decided that I didn't like that area, so I went over it and blended it back down so it could go back on top of it. Now I definitely want the white along this side to be a little bit brighter than anywhere else, because the light would be catching it on the edge of the muzzle. But I'm allowing it to blend with the colours underneath as well, and then I can put additional layers on top if need be. Keeping the markings, sorry, the pencil strokes short there, because you would literally just be seeing the tips of the hairs because of the angle the fox is looking, or the direction the fox is looking in. So on certain areas on a portrait you're going to be seeing the full length of a hair or a 3/4 length of the hair, and then when it comes to areas where the hair is very short you might only be seeing the tips of the hairs, or no detail at all, as the, if you want it to look out of focus. So just reapplying my little markings in there so I don't lose them. I think this bit was probably more time consuming, going backwards and forwards, than anything else. I think, apart from the eyes obviously. But when you want the focus of the viewer to be on a certain area, I didn't want to leave anything unfinished, I guess. So when you're working in out of focus areas, it can be an unfinished look, and that will make it look out of focus in certain areas. But when it's something like this and it's so close to the eyes that hopefully are the main focus of the painting, then I wanted to make sure it was just as I wanted it to be. So with all the white done, it's time to get some detail into this area, and then slowly lose the detail working towards the back end of the fox. And it's just a case of just randomly popping detail in, and then gradually lessening the amount of detail until I'm back into just the base coats that I'd applied earlier. And then what I'd do is just soften out the base coats and then leave them alone and not pop anything else onto them. So gently, just very, so it looks like I'm pressing on, but I'm literally just gliding the pencil across the paper now, just letting the paper pick up the pigment from the pencil so that the detail isn't too harsh, it isn't too detailed. It's blending in with the base coat layers that I've applied underneath. And then just increasing the darks in some areas, but still keeping it nice and soft. And blending it out so it looks even softer. And there you have him. Red Fox in pastel on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. Thanks for joining me today. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment below if you'd like me to cover any subjects or mediums. And I will see you all soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.